So anyway, let's get right into your story, which again I find fascinating. Tell us about your journey into, what ended up being diagnosed with several severe, complications.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so funny because I didn't know what I was dealing with whenever I started on this journey. I thought I was just dealing with mental illness. And then I discovered a little bit later that I was dealing with multiple sclerosis as well. So for me personally, I had to make it as simple as possible. I didn't have the mental capacity to read scientific journal articles or watch 2 hour long, videos. I had to just give me the basics. Because my bipolar disorder had turned into rapid cycling. And let me back up just a little bit. The really tricky part with that is that I had my master's in clinical counseling and I was practicing as a therapist. So for me to be experiencing mental illness does not bode well for my career at all. And I was able to do it because bipolar disorder goes into cycles and you have a window of good time. You have a window of time where you're stable and you're able, and honestly, most bipolar people usually knock it out of the park.
Mm.
They're usually do really, really well, but nobody knows that the days that they don't see them, they're in bed with the covers over their head, wanting to not wake up the next day. And so it came to the point where it was unethical for me to continue practicing because I didn't know who I was from one day to the next. It was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And at that point, I was eating ramen noodles and Doritos and Oreos and entire pizzas by myself and donuts and cakes and all the things and wine in the box. So I did not, I want to preface that by saying I didn't have like a healthy lifestyle. I had the typical standard American diet. And then like you said, February of 2019, so right there before you, I found out about a story of a woman who had bipolar disorder and she resolved it 10 years prior by eating fatty animal meat. And all I heard was like Dumb and Dumber, like, you're telling me there's a chance? And so I was like, I don't care. And the cool part about bipolar disorder is we can jump in. Like we have that like just impulsivity. And I went all in. And so overnight, I went from Doritos and ramen noodles to only eating burgers and bacon and chicken wings and steaks, and beef brisket. And then miraculously, my last bipolar episode was April of 2019. And then I went back to work full time in June. My psychiatrist tapered me off of all my psych meds. My last psych med was September of 2019. And I've been stable ever since, eating fatty animal meat. The tricky part was 3 weeks into eating this way, I was hospitalized and I couldn't swallow water. So a logical person would say, I started this all meat diet and now I'm hospitalized and I can't even swallow water. I need to go back to the Doritos and the ramen noodles. But something in me knew that I was on the right track. They did MRIs and a lumbar puncture, and they diagnosed me with multiple sclerosis. Very soon after that, I couldn't walk without an assistive device. I had delayed and slurred speech and more significant brain fog than I ever had with bipolar disorder. So I just kept eating the meat and I kept researching, okay, this is inflammation and I'm reducing inflammation. And my last MS symptom was May 9th of 2019. They followed up with all the MRIs and my lesions just kept shrinking. My last MRI showed no new MS activity. I still haven't had a symptom since May 9th of 2019 for multiple sclerosis.
Wow,
So that's my
that's
story.
that's amazing. I just think if somebody hadn't heard that kind of thing before, they might have a really tough time believing you that you're able to clear all of those things up. But you've said the same thing, right? Like if it wasn't you and your own story, you might not even believe yourself telling it.
Not might. I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I would be like, "Oh, that's cute for you, but that's not for me." And what I think is really important is that I did not make a logical decision to eat this way. It was a knowing. It was a spiritual experience. I heard it and I resonated with it so strongly. And so I think sometimes that's really all we have to do is to really navigate into leaning into what our body is trying to tell us. Hey, this is the direction. Go that way. Kind of like that game Hot and Cold.
Yeah, I like that. That's very well explained. I want to go back early on when you were first noticing bipolar and some of the symptoms that you were getting from the bipolar. What was that like in the very beginning? In hindsight, I'm sure you discovered it far later than you were actually having a lot of the symptoms and maybe just kind of played it off. What is it like?
Yeah, it's really funny because you don't realize the distortion until you get the correct vision. And so it's like, okay, say you need glasses and you're driving down the street and you can't read the street signs until you get right up on the street. And you don't know until you get glasses that your vision is off. And you're like, oh, I was supposed to be able to see that. And so for me with bipolar disorder, it's literally a lens that we see our lives through that's distorted. For instance, someone might say to me, "Hey, it's a really nice day outside." And I don't hear that whenever I'm in bipolar disorder. I hear, "It's a nice day outside. Why aren't you outside cleaning the car? Why aren't you outside doing the gardening? Why are you just sitting on the couch when it's such a nice day outside?" They didn't say that, but that's what I heard. I heard the accusations. I heard the judgments. And that's what I heard when anybody would speak to me. And then of course I had that negative self-talk in my own story in my own brain. And so I didn't realize that that was literally the filter that I saw everything through until I had that clear vision and everything lifted. And I was like, oh, like I'm okay. I'm really doing a great job. And so might be saying something over there, and that has nothing to do with me. And that piece is where I actually found the freedom from the bipolar disorder, but I couldn't get there eating ramen noodles and Doritos.
Yeah. Okay. One of my favorite interviews that you've done was on Carrie Mann's channel, the Homestead How. I really love that interview that you guys did. And you talked a little bit about that, is how like you really don't notice the things around you when you're in it. It's like being in the fog. I think you guys referenced. Like I'm looking outside today and in Salt Lake City, and it's completely blue sky, not a cloud in the sky, but the air quality is still not that great. And so you don't realize that your visibility is not as good as you thought it was. Yeah, or when there's no pollution, it's way better. And I think back to when I started Carnivore, April 2019, and I remember like a very stressful thing happened, and it was okay. And I remember thinking like, why is this so okay? Why is that tree so beautiful? And like the birds, and like you realize like, oh, I've been spinning around in all these weird problems I've been inventing for myself that were never going to happen. I didn't know that. I was not diagnosed with anxiety. It wasn't severe enough that it was hampering my life, but boy, was it uncomfortable looking back, especially when you get on the other side of it. So it's interesting that you point that out.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that unfortunately, we don't have these conversations a lot. And so people don't know that, you're flipping through Facebook and somebody has this cute little white picket fence life and you think that that is reality, and it actually isn't, because we don't have these honest conversations about anxiety, depression, and our mental health. And so a lot of people, what I love so much is I'll be working with a client, they'll get to like day 35, 45, and then it'll lift and they'll be like, "Oh, hey, so my husband's still my husband, my job is still my job, my kid is still my kid, my car is still my car, but I'm okay." Like their circumstances don't change. They do. Their perspective changes. And then they're like, I can handle anything. Like I can take on whatever comes at me because I am the tool. I am the technology that is going to be able to navigate through come what may.